Hi, I'm Sylvia Soderberg, and I'm a member of the King's Chapel Environmental Action Steering Committee. And I'm so glad to see you all. And I'm thinking that probably more people will be joining us as we go along. For those who are new to us, we are the KC Environmental Action Initiative, and we were formed early in 2020, largely to share information and opportunities for action against climate change. Our activities have been many and varied. We host these discussions, such as this one, which is I think it's our 6th seminar. And we invite speakers from our own community and also such as these people today beyond, just to name a few things. Last year for the Earth Day celebration, we produced a slideshow, an art show. And this and many of our other previous activities you can find on our website. All you have to do is Google King's Chapel Environmental Initiative, and it will all pop up, and you'll just be amazed, I'm sure. We've been busy, and we have had a really wonderful time doing this. And as I remind you, if anybody has just come in, we are being recorded. Do go to our website. It's full of good information, and we have also an environmental checklist that we produce each month. That is, Kent does it each month. Anyway, thank you for coming. It's lovely to see you all.
And now I believe Julie will be up.
I'm Julie Hyde, and I just want to take a brief moment for a blessing, even as we pray for the end of war. May we be grateful for this gathering, that we may learn from one another, support each other's work and leadership, and then choose to take action locally to replace the failing and damaging systems of our everyday lives, and to help create the more beautiful world we know is possible. And so I give you Dory Seavey, our host.
Great, thank you. How about if I introduce the guests from HEAT, and then Councillor, would you like to say a few words? And then, very good. So we're just delighted to have here two people from HEAT. Alyssa Raymond Reed is a senior advisor at HEAT, where she helps plan and advocate for a just transition grounded in equity-centered approaches. And she's a former vice president and Massachusetts director of the Conservation Law Foundation. She's also a lawyer and a civil rights advocate. We're also so pleased to have Audrey Shulman here. She co-founded HEAT in 2008 and is one of its 2 directors. And he's just an amazing nonprofit based in Cambridge. It's innovated several terrific projects and services related to energy efficiency and lowering greenhouse gases, including these amazing maps of gas leaks all across the greater Boston area. And now it's become a nationally recognized incubator for network geothermal districts. And the acronym for that is the Geogrid. And that's what HEAT is here today to talk about. So thank you so much, Alyssa and Audrey. And let me now invite Councillor Bach to say a word. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for being here. I'm Kenzie Bach. I'm the city councilor. I have the district that's West End, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, Fenway, and Mission Hill. So I just miss having King's Chapel, although I have the King's Chapel Parish House in my district. But I really appreciate the recognition that climate justice is something that our faith community should be engaged in. And I really appreciate the work of the HEAT folks and just the fact that this is such a solutions-oriented, pragmatic approach that we're going to hear about today. One of the things that Dory's heard me talk about before is that my grandmother actually raised my dad and uncle on Beacon Hill in the house that I'm coming to you live from now. And one of the first things that she did as a young mother was go around and talk to her neighbors one by one about considering switching off of coal, because when they moved on to Beacon Hill in the 50s, And then into the 60s, people were still using coal. There's a lot of coal grates out front of the houses, and it was a cheap fuel source. But it was also, coal dust was in the air, and it was affecting asthma for kids. And my grandmother had 2 young kids, and she wanted less coal dust that they would be inhaling. And I think about that story a lot, because I think, so often the challenges that we experience as new challenges are actually ones that people have confronted before, have tackled before. And the idea that our climate future depends both on system solutions and on the kind of consumer demand piece of it all. And so we at the same time, simultaneously, we need to create the alternative systems, because it's not reasonable to ask people to change their lives if we don't have an alternative. But at the same time, there is this degree of saying to each other, hey, a different world is possible. And yes, we have this legacy system, and it seems convenient, and maybe it seems cheap, but at the same time, we've got a bunch of needs as a community that need to drive us in a different direction. And so, my grandmother, very grateful to say that she is still with us. So that is in her lifetime story. People are not using coal in the city of Boston these days. And it is very much my hope as a counselor that in a few decades, I will be able to tell people about how we used to rely on gas, and we moved away from that. And so I really appreciate all the people who are working to make it so. And I just would counsel courage and optimism about our ability to shift our energy system. So thanks so much, Dory, for giving me the opportunity to kick us off.
Well, our thanks is to you, Counselor. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to turn the meeting over now to Alyssa, who's going to give us a presentation, and then Audrey will be with us for questions and answers.
Great. Well, thank you, Kent. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Dory. Thank you, Kenzie, Counselor. Great introductory remarks. Also nice intro. And I'm going to just request that if you have questions, I'm going to try to give the presentation and then leave us a lot of time for dialogue, which is usually the best part of these things. So I want to make sure we have time for that. So if you have questions, either hold them or feel free to stick them in the chat if you know how to use that feature. I also just really want to thank everybody for helping me in the beginning with the tech part. I'm in New Hampshire right now, took a few days off. I'm also a major advocate on trans rights. And as you all know, the past few weeks have been filled with all kinds of stuff in the news. So I've been here looking out on the lake in New Hampshire and not in my regular computer. So very big gratitude for the tech help. Let me know if while I'm talking anything goes funky, and I'll try to correct it. So I'm going to do a little more introduction of myself. Senior advisor, that means I'm helping HEAT as it grows. And HEAT, this amazing organization that you've started to hear about, is a tiny little organization that is punching hugely above its weight. You might have seen some big stories, Sunday Boston Globe a few weeks ago, some profiles of Audrey and our other co-executive director, Zainab Magavi, and their personal stories. And the reason why there have been these in-depth profiles about HEAT's work is because of HEAT's enormously big ideas to transform our energy system and the way that HEAT has fused relationships with big ideas. So focusing on the way that we personally come to this, I'm going to add one more personal thing that was not in the intro Dory gave, because most people don't know this about me, but I got a master's degree in religious theology. I went to Union Theological Seminary. And I studied as a I wasn't becoming clergy, but as a master's student. And I'm really interested in how faith rhetoric and our faith beliefs come to play in our advocacy work and in our public policy. So it's really, really a pleasure to be here today with this group of people. So HEAT is a clean energy incubator. That means we design and evaluate solutions to climate change. We are a nonprofit, we're a C3, and we're a leader on equitable energy efficiency. And as you heard, gas leaks, gas mapping, and what we're going to talk about today, which is the geogrid, which is a concept, a model that we think can transform clean energy and provide a solution to decarbonization. We are only funded by foundations and donors, and this is really important. We don't accept any funding from industry, whether that is geothermal industry or gas utilities. And that means we're really relying upon foundation and grant and individual support to make sure that we can remain unbiased, impartial, and credible in our work. All right, so a little bit more about heat. We are data driven. We use research, we use data transparency, and really importantly, we use third-party verification to check our results, and we then try to disseminate all of what we learn widely. We use something called Creative Commons, and this is a way of sharing information that gives us credit. We just want to be credited for our work, attributed, but we make all of our work totally accessible so that everybody can use it, so it's not proprietary and charged. We get really good results because we're consistently, some people say bi-directional, I'd like to say multi-directional. We try to get input from every possible stakeholder we can think of that might be impacted by climate change and who might be part of a climate change solution or even a barrier to climate change solution. So we do a lot of stakeholdering. What is stakeholdering? Another way of talking about this is networked leadership. So we engage all stakeholders to get to yes. So you can see in this photograph, this is one of our monthly charrettes. And we hold these charrettes, which are kind of like workshops with all the different stakeholders or all the different leaders that we think might need to be part of the conversation to help issue spot what could be an obstacle, what could be some kind of a variable or factor that we don't know about. So for example, union leaders and utility executives together, community activists and geothermal experts and researchers and elected officials all together thinking about the problem and then workshopping it together. So today, this conversation, this presentation isn't just about climate change, the problem, but it's really about what is the solution? What kind of solutions can we implement quickly and equitably? And looking here in Massachusetts, what are we up against when it comes to decarbonization? And the first thing I'll say is that we have a ticking time clock. We have this roadmap bill that some of you may know passed last year. That means that we have a sort of gun to our head in a good way to get us off of gas. And this is happening all over the country. So gas companies all over the country are facing different kinds of decarbonization dockets, whether it's regulation or legislation that is forcing them to think about their business model. What are they going to do? It's really an existential threat to the business model of selling gas. Another thing is that gas utilities are facing this challenge of they have to replace their aging infrastructure for safety. So you see this great image here. And what this shows you is the next 5 years of pipe replacement work sites that are reported by the Massachusetts utilities. So get this, over the next 2 decades, the total cost of this new replacement infrastructure here in Massachusetts will be greater than the cost of all of the infrastructure currently in the ground in its depreciated state. And these pipes that are being installed now are going to be paid for by all of the gas customers, all of us, or many of us, maybe some of you are not on gas anymore, over the next half of a century. So for decades, even after we stop using all of these pipes, and that's something we're going to have to do because of the decarbonization mandates that we face, our children, mine are 8 and 10, are going to be paying for these pipes going forward. Another thing that we face here in Massachusetts is customers are starting to shift off of gas. Who's shifting off of gas? People who can pay the very high cost of shifting off of gas. So homeowners and businesses are going to have to move off of gas. They're going to have to move to electrify at increasing speeds because of the mandates that are now have been enacted by law. Every single building and home that moves off of the gas system means that there's fewer people, fewer customers that remain to pay for those fixed costs. And that creates this very scary inflection point where as people flee off of the gas system and electrify, those fixed costs don't change, they stay the same. And the people who have the least means, who are least able to pay for the high cost of electrifying, are going to start shouldering those costs. So what do? We have to move off of gas. We have to find some way to safely deliver decarbonized heat by law. And we have to find something that is the same or lower cost than gas is right now. And gas right now costs a lot. It costs a lot more now than it did when I was preparing to talk to you, even last week and the week before. Heat and our colleagues have a solution, and we call the solution the Geogrid. And so you're looking at it here. About 4 years ago, we invented this idea of a street segment network of ground source heat pumps. It's kind of like the gas system is, it's kind of like that structure. So you have the infrastructure in the street. You have service lines going to each building, whether it's a home or a bigger building. And then there's boreholes that go down a few hundred feet into the ground that are filled with just regular water. And then heat pumps in each building pull off the heating or the cooling. So I'm gonna give a little plug that there's also cooling here from that water. And this is just hugely exciting because this means that the gas utilities already have the right of way. They already have the expertise pumping the thermal energy through the pipes that are in the ground. And they already have the financing methods to spread the cost of this huge infrastructure over all of, across all of us as consumers and over decades. So it's basically it's like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like we already have a model for delivering our heating and cooling needs. And this is a way to do it in a renewable way. It's also a non-intermittent renewable. So like wind or solar is less reliable in a way because you don't predict it, you can't control it. And this is huge because it allows for a reliable renewable energy, and it's also accelerated. Because there's already this existing infrastructure, we potentially can have it go a lot faster because we don't have to build it new. So a little background on, is this really possible? He contracted an engineering company. It's called Burrow Happold Engineering. This is the same group that did New York City's 80 by 50 plan. And he asked them to create a feasibility report on how much energy this geogrid model that we have could provide. And what they found, they calculated hourly energy loads for different types of streets and neighborhoods. So suburban neighborhoods that are a little bit more dispersed, all the way to more densely urban populated areas. And they checked the results against the real customer data from Eversource Energy. And what they found is that the system with boreholes 500 feet deep, spaced every 20 feet down the street in the gas company's right of way, could meet nearly 100% of the energy demand of most of our state. This is huge. So this, just knowing that this kind of feasibility project shows that this is possible. That means in the most dense parts of the cities in Massachusetts, we'd have to make the boreholes maybe a little deeper, or put boreholes in parking lots, or interconnect different segments, but we can move any excess energy to where it's needed in the cities. There's some huge advantages of this kind of networked ground source heat pump. So first, excess energy. Imagine that there's a supermarket, and this was really helpful to me learning about this. So it has refrigerators that go through the winter. And those refrigerators reject heat into the shared loop of the water, making that water hotter. That hotter water can then, that heat that's generated can then be used by the homes down the street. So this image gives you a little sense of what that looks like. Those images always help me understand. Another advantage is storage. The excess energy, like the heat that gets generated in the middle of the summer, can be stored in the ground until it's needed months later in the winter. So this is really good for Massachusetts because we have some seasons here. Over time, we found a number of different case studies of the geogrid. So there are places where people have already been experimenting with this. And one of those places is Colorado Mesa University. So here you can see this case study. And in this case study, this is like Lego blocks. So there's 4 different systems that were put in, and they were interconnected to fit together over time. And together they serve over 1 million square feet of buildings. And just like with the geogrid that Heat has conceived, these components would then be interconnected so that it would become this big grid, the geogrid. At Colorado Mesa, what's really interesting is that they created like a backup plan, like, okay, if this doesn't work, what's our backup plan? And they created a backup plan of gas boilers that would be able to restore the temperature of the water if it got too cold. But guess what? In over 12 years, they have not had to fire up those boilers. So that's very promising. So we know that air source heat pumps are over twice as efficient as gas, and that ground source heat pumps are even more efficient than air source heat pumps. So real examples like Colorado Mesa University, the one that last slide, we know that the network ground source heat pumps, when the whole system is considered and not just one of those little pieces of it, are almost 3 times more efficient than air source. So together, these systems can radically reduce the impact on the electric grid and moving us and all of our buildings and our homes to electricity and reducing the amount of renewable energy we need to make that electricity renewable. So what does this really mean? It means that we think that this is going to cost a lot less to electrify. Heat has been, I think this is one of the reasons why I was drawn to come and work with Audrey and Zainab, is that heat has been just enormously successful in getting people to the table, getting key stakeholders to really think of this as a viable model. And that's because the benefits are really undeniable. And I'm going to list a few of them to give you a sense of what we're thinking this could accomplish. So first is safety. I happened to be in Merrimack Valley when I was actually holding a board meeting at Conservation Law Foundation. We were having a board meeting when the gas explosions happened and we had to flee. This is just an opportunity that doesn't have gas involved. So it's water. So this is a much safer option. A second benefit is it provides cooling. Geogrid provides cooling, air conditioning. So the Geogrid can deliver cooling, not only heating, and we think we're going to have a warmer future. So this is a good thing to have some AC built in. Third, another benefit is money, is the cost. So in terms of energy bills with gas, the cost of fuel is about 50% of your current bill. So the Geogrid system, there's no gas and you're just not paying for that. You're not paying for the fuel itself, it's gone. Applied Economics Clinic projected average annual heating bills of gas versus network geothermal, which is the Geogrid model. And they found that network geothermal costs much less than gas, and that this includes the installation costs being amortized over decades, which is the same as the gas system. Another benefit is emissions reduction. So we know we have to do it. We have to cut emissions now, and the Geogrid does this very, very well. The production of the electricity used is the only source of emissions associated with the system altogether. Here in Massachusetts, given our electric grid fuel mix, any building connected to the Geogrid system would reduce emissions about 60% in comparison to gas. And as we have to move, as our electric grid moves, and it must, toward renewables, those emissions are going to continue to decline. Another benefit is equitable access. So this is, maybe most important if installed by utilities. The cost of the Geogrid model would be spread across all of us and over decades. So as you heard when I was talking earlier about that inflection point of people kind of fleeing off the gas system, this model prevents that sort of burden on the least well-resourced communities to move to renewables. Big one for me as a labor lawyer is jobs. So the Geogrid model has the potential to provide a lot of jobs. At the very least, to retrain existing workers, the gas workers. So since the water pipe that runs up and down the street is basically the same type as the pipes that are now installed for gas, we think that workers can be easily retrained. And very appealing is that these jobs would be safer. So there's already a huge safety risk with gas, and this would eliminate that. And I think this is why heat has really won early support from labor unions and from worker justice advocates. And this is really critical. You've heard about the Green New Deal and people trying to figure out how do we not create, either a monopoly for gas companies to transition to this, or to get rid of labor. And this would be a potential pathway to include a workforce and to include training. So another big one is healthier indoor air. The geogrid just doesn't have combustion, so the air would be healthier inside of buildings. And we know that this is a huge area of concern now. In the last few weeks, there's been a lot of news on indoor air quality, you may have seen. So having indoor air quality that is poor exacerbates huge inequities that exist in communities that already are disproportionately having poorer air quality. And the geogrid would be a huge benefit in that way as well. So where are we right now? We are in a very, very exciting place in the Commonwealth. We already have a number of demonstration projects of installations of the geogrid that are going into the ground. We have Eversource, that's going to be the first in Framingham. National Grid has 4 demonstration projects planned, and those include electrification, which means appliances, like getting into people's homes, kind of all the way from A to Z. And very excitingly for us at HEAT, there's a lot of interest nationally. So we've gotten so many calls from people all over the country, from advocates and experts and regulators and gas executives and folks that are interested in bringing this to their city or to their state, how to bring this concept forward. But what do we need? We have some hurdles that we have to surmount. We have some regulatory and legislative hurdles. So right now, gas companies can only sell gas, and they need to have permission to be able to sell something else if we're going to be able to transition them to a geogrid model. And HEAT is part of a coalition that's called the Gas Leaks Allies, some of you may have heard, that proposed the future of HEAT legislation that would allow that switch. So to allow the utilities to sell something else besides gas. And this is on the slate this session. So hopefully we'll see it pass before July 31st this year. It would allow GeoGrid's heating and cooling model. It would limit depreciation for any gas infrastructure, but not for the renewable infrastructure. So it would kind of incentivize the gas utilities to install more and more of the GeoGrid. And it securitizes the long-term debt from the infrastructure to reduce the cost. And those savings per the bill, per the legislation, would go to worker training and low-income retrofits. So if the legislation passes, we imagine the first geogrid installation could be on the distal end of gas infrastructure. So you see in this image, kind of like a place that would be non-critical, leak prone, like a cul-de-sac. There could be a single gas heater at the end of the street that would provide supplemental backup heat if we needed it. But like we saw from Colorado Mesa, it would be unlikely to be needed. And then with that first pilot in the ground, you could start building those Lego blocks that I talked about. So additional street segments would be connected and added, and then more backup would be provided. And it's basically like grafting. You're kind of, if you see this image, it almost looks like you're grafting a renewable thermal delivery network onto the gas system, and it's growing. And then there's one sort of gas geo hybrid system with a single rate base. Over time, the geo part would grow and the gas part would shrink until, boom, you have the whole map is green and the only gas needed is at the very center of the urban area. And then because this system results in lower energy bills and emissions, it could avoid all or hopefully all of that risk of the inflection point of everybody running away and shouldering just a few people with the burdens of the stranded assets. Even though I'm basically reporting a sort of sunny tale of how HEAT has brought concept to implementation in just a few years, there still is a whole lot that needs to be done to bring this concept to scale. So HEAT is now investing in and convening a research team that would really make sure, it would monitor and watchdog and make sure that these first installations, these first demonstrations would in fact be feasible in the ways that we predict, and then to safeguard the equity and safety and affordability concerns that are so central to the GeoGrid plan. So we have convened this research team that would do this with Harvard and MIT and 2 national labs. And the team would perform a review of the design concept. It would install sensors to collect data. It would make the data transparent and normalized, so all future installations can be compared, so we can have a really robust set of data. And we would have third-party verification of the results, so that when the scaled up impacts happened, we would have this huge library of resources that can accelerate market transformation. And it's this kind of really deep, thoughtful, networked leadership, multi-directional research that we think will ensure the equity, the participation, the safety, the speed that we think the GeoGrid can provide. And so now's my little fundraising pitch that we need help to make that part happen. So let's make it happen. And here's that image, this great image of the potential fossil fuel installations. So we think if we're successful, you can now picture this in your head. What it would look like if all of these sites here became the seed sites for the GeoGrid instead of the site of future fossil fuel installations. This is really what I'd like to leave you with, is this image of the what if. Imagine all of these were now becoming part of that awesome GeoGrid look, that Lego set. And that's it. I'm gonna now take us off of the screen so we can all see each other. And I welcome questions, and Audrey is gonna hopefully be unmuted and free to, she's got the whole institutional history of heat in this work as well. So thank you so much.
So, and I think Cynthia, are you planning to help moderate the questions? You should unmute.
I think Audrey's gonna do it.
Oh,
And
okay.
that-
They
that
like to
will be
handle it themselves. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So and I'd love to have Alyssa, wherever you feel comfortable, answer whatever questions you want. So. And I,
Dory asked a question in the chat. Do we still need to raise money for the independent research team? Always, Dory. Yes. But Audrey, you want to talk a little bit about ARPA, maybe?
yeah, we're very lucky in that the state legislature has approved $5 million for a GeoGrid research team, because they sort of understand the scaled up impact of this, of the ability to move all of our heating and cooling, or at least a large proportion of it, off of gas and towards something that can meet our state's mandate to reduce emissions. So hopefully, heat will be getting a portion of that money to be able to enact what, at least a portion of that money to be able to enact, the research team that we put together for the Department of Energy a while ago, so that we can, there's 2 national labs, Harvard, MIT, Sloan School, and others involved in figuring out not only if the design is done well, what the cost should be, what the scaled up impacts might be, what kind of, how much it would improve our health, et cetera, so that we can all know and trust in the results, rather than, because a lot of people don't trust in utility reports.
I'm going to add something to what Audrey said, and I see there's one question in the chat, and I see Ken has a hand up. So I'm going to add to Audrey that what shocked me when I joined HEAT was that they basically had never really asked for money in the way that traditionally nonprofits do. In my personal experience, having done some fundraising, it just sort of was through the work and people being so passionate, and it wasn't like a true ask of like, we need this. And I'm going to tell you that HEAT needs to be able to do the infrastructure and foundation building to create all the staffing we need to be able to support these kinds of recognitions that we've gotten. So from the state legislature and the hopeful ARPA funding that we get, we've gotten our first national foundations that have been interested in our work and started funding us. But we are less than 10 people, and most people are not full-time. So we really do still need help with that. And so I'm going to say that very clearly. And then I'm going to read Ernesto, I hope I'm saying your name right, in the chat. What is the status of National Grid's decisions on their 4 projects? What should interested communities do? Audrey, you want to-
Do you want to take that or do you want me to?
Well, my understanding is that, first of all, one of the things that was super just sort of mind-blowingly exciting was how many municipalities and communities were seeking to be the first or to get this initial demonstration funding to come to them from Eversource and now from National Grid. The interest has been huge. I live in Beverly, Mass, and the mayor of Beverly got so excited that he came and he sent his whole team to one of the charrettes at my invitation, and now he's got Audrey and Zainab on his mailing list and wants to have Beverly get one of the demonstration projects. We've been really interested in how many leaders and landlords and CDCs are interested in this and want to follow this work. So what interested communities should do is send a letter to National Grid and let them know, because the more that, and maybe also to your elected officials, letting them know that this is something that you would like, because it signals that, first of all, this legislation needs to be passed to allow this to happen. And second of all, it lets the utilities know that there's a consumer base for this, that this will be a successful business model for them. And Audrey, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so what National Grid's looking for is they're looking for 4 different demonstration installations. We don't tend to call them pilots, because this kind of system is installed in college campuses all over the country. So it's just whether or not the utility can do it well and in the street. So they'll be doing 4 different installations. What they're looking for is one or all of low to moderate income customers on that shared loop of water, gas constraints, or leak-prone infrastructure. So anywhere where otherwise they're going to have to pour a lot of money into the gas infrastructure in order to keep it safe. So and everybody, all the buildings that are connected will have all of their gas appliances switched out for electric appliances. So this is a way to have the gas utilities pay for your building to be electrified, which is, of course, the best way forward towards lowering emissions, because our electricity is increasingly produced with renewables. So it just, without you doing anything, you can sit at your own home, twiddling your fingers, and your emissions are reducing every year.
Kent, I see your hand up.
Yeah, my question was simply this. I understand from your talk and from what I have heard previously that about the plumbing, so to speak, in the streets and the connections. But I'm not sure I fully understand is what the equipment in the homes or the buildings does. Could you give a brief description of what equipment it will exist in the buildings that will be able to utilize this warmed or cooled water?
Yeah.
You want me to take that, Alyssa, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So it depends, every building will be different. So for instance, if you have, ducted hot water and cool, AC, then your mechanical will be taken out, and instead a heat pump will be put in. You will also have to have, probably more insulation and air sealing so that your building can, deal with the slightly lower temperature that this system would produce instead, because with combustion, of course, it's a hotter temperature than with a heat pump. And so David, at any point, if I misspeak, please, or throw in whatever you want. If you have radiators, like in my house, again, some insulation and air sealing, and then it is a water source heat pump. Even though it's called geothermal, it's a water source heat pump. So that water source would easily connect to your radiators. You would not be able to get cooling under that situation unless you did additional, ducts, or potentially, and this is somewhat, technologically interesting, put mini split heads and connect them to the water source heat pump. David, do you want to add anything to that, or throw in aspersions on anything I said?
Of course not. No, this is something that everybody asks all the time, and it is really something that has been done for, I mean, I personally installed heat pumps like 30 years ago, so it's not new at all. And anytime you install a heat pump in a house, you've got to change some things around. Sometimes it's greater and sometimes it's less. But it's been done a lot for a long time.
Yeah. And you're in case, for anybody who doesn't know heat pumps, it's basically like a fridge that can run forward or backward. So it can move temperature into, heat into or out of your building.
And Audrey, I think that the National Grid demonstration projects will be doing that. Like they're going to be doing the appliances, right? And the installation of the appliances for the building owners. Yeah. So
it's all on their, so far as I know, it's all on their dime. So it's a way of, getting, electrifying, radically reducing your emissions at the cost of the gas utility. That's a win.
So it uses, in some cases, existing heat pumps, but this water is piped in to help augment what the heat pump does. Is that a fair statement?
No, so you probably, if you're talking about existing heat pumps, you probably have air source heat pumps. And it might be difficult to connect existing air source heat pumps to a water source heat pump. You'd probably have that mechanical pulled out and a different one put in.
Okay.
As I
before
understand.
before we go off of this topic, Charles just asked in the bottom of the chat, can heat pumps damage the environment? Just staying on this for a second.
Yeah. Heat pumps use much. So I'll give a little information. Again, David will fact check me. Heat pumps are fabulous because instead of burning something in order to create heat, what they do is they take naturally occurring temperature, heat, outside your home and move it into your home, or inside your home and move it out, right? So it's a much more efficient process. A gas boiler, for every 1 unit of energy used, will move less than that 1 unit of energy. Like the best ones are like 97% efficient. So that means it's 97% of that 1 unit that you're getting. But an air source heat pump will move 2 to 3 units of energy for every 1 unit of energy used. And a networked ground source heat pump will do somewhere 6 to 8 units of energy that are moved for every 1 unit of energy used, because the ground is always the same temperature and the system can work so efficiently. The one way in which heat pumps can damage the environment is they have refrigerant inside of them, which can be more or less bad for the environment if it is ever released into the atmosphere. Air source heat pumps are not factory sealed, so they are slightly more likely to release that refrigerant. You should always, if you have a heat pump, you should always make sure it's decommissioned in the appropriate way at the end of its life. Anything you want to add to that, David?
No, just that the Freon is really the only thing, and there is getting to be less and less Freon in the systems. They're using smaller and smaller amounts, so it's fairly minor.
Yeah, and ironically, there's a CO2 now that's being used as refrigerant. So it's possible we could take CO2 out of the atmosphere, put it in our heat pump, and everything would be, way better.
Catherine had asked, why not go right to air heat pumps? Catherine, did that answer that question, that they're more ground source heat pumps are more efficient?
Yes.
Yeah, it did. But, I have 2 air heat pumps, and they're very good. They're very efficient. The installation is significantly less than what you're talking about for pumping water. I'm not going to have any leaks. I mean, my hot water heater just went, but that's a different matter. I think that I'm very happy with my heat pumps. I do see the difference in efficiency that you're describing, but it does seem that one has to weigh the 2 options.
Yeah, I think air source heat pumps will always be needed and are a critical part of the solution. The reason why we push, we need every option on the table, right? We're pushing geogrids for a variety of reasons. One, that makes it so that the people who have means and motivation will not get off of the gas system, leaving only low income on it, paying for the entire fixed cost of the system. That will be just a equity problem that we cannot even begin to imagine right now. Where there's something called the heat or eat dilemma, where people have to make the decision between keeping their homes warm or putting food in their mouth. And I don't think that that's something we want to move toward in the name of reducing emissions. And then secondly, if everybody goes to air source heat pumps, again, it's a fabulous, fabulous solution. But when the air is the coldest outside is when the air source heat pump is the least efficient, because it has to work really hard to pull the temperature it wants into your home. And so at that point, that's when the electric grid would be most strained, both with all of our buildings going to electricity, as well as our cars going to electricity. That's going to mean a huge build out in the electric grid that will all hurt our pocketbooks. So instead, if we can use the most efficient system wherever we can, which would be the geogrid, because it's approximately 2 to 3 times more efficient than air source heat pumps, then we can dramatically lower the impact on the electric grid and thus lower the cost.
Yeah, I'd just like to add something and just punch up what you said, or maybe Alyssa said about we're trying to pull heat out of the air when it's the coldest and trying to push heat into the air when it's the hottest with an air source heat pump. With the geothermal model, the temperature is always 55 and heat pumps really like just running at 55-degree source temperature all the time. The maintenance is way down. The efficiency is up. They just run forever and ever. So that's another really important point, is that they last a long time without any troubles, or with a lot less.
So I'm gonna move to a couple other questions that are off this topic in the chat. One is from Lois. How far has the project gotten in Framingham and Merrimack?
Alyssa, do you want to take the Framingham one?
It hasn't started yet, but it's going to start. To be honest with you, one of the things that I mentioned that was so cool about this to watch was just all of the vying for having it come, me first. But there was also quite a lot of politics involved, as you can imagine, like which community for which density for which income population, and so part of what's happening is that the utility companies are testing it out too, right? Like we're all testing it out to see whether this can be scaled. I think the Framingham one is set to go in the next, like by the summer, right? Or start in the summer. But Audrey, maybe you know the time frame better than I do.
Yeah, it'll start to be installed in the summer or the fall. It'll be turned on by the heating season. And what's really exciting to me is that they retrained gas salespeople to sell geo. And then they went out into the neighborhood, which is sort of a middle-class neighborhood. And they had the 2 best days of their lives, so that they had 47 sales in just 2 days, which is something that is unheard of for gas salespeople. And so this is a system that people want a lot. In the Merrimack Valley. Yeah, so that one is, it's being funded by the Columbia Gas Settlement from the Merrimack Valley gas disaster a few years ago. The Attorney General's Office and the DOER, the Department of Energy Resources, is overseeing an RFP, and it'll probably happen in 2 different segments. So first they'll select a site, and then they'll select designers and installers and people to own the system. So this is a way for the people in Merrimack Valley to, at least one section of it to get off of gas after that horrific incident.
Okay, thank you. So in other words, it's not for the whole city of Framingham. People choose it, and it's going to be aimed for one neighborhood, so to say.
Yes, it's right by, I think, the high school. It's off of Concord Street, I think. And so it's one particular site, and it's limited in scope.
Thank you.
They've gotten way too many people for it already, and they're not quite sure what to do.
So here's a question from Carol. If gas infrastructure is removed, what happens in a blackout? in the suburbs, they occasionally happen when a tree takes down wiring in a bad storm. Is there some sort of backup to handle this?
Great question. So little did you know that if you have a, boiler, a gas boiler or a furnace or anything for the last like 40 years, if the electricity goes out, your boiler, your furnace stops working too, because they need electricity to function. So we're screwed either way. In the situation with the geogrid, our hope is, because it uses such a small amount of electricity, is that there could be a battery backup on it, so that you could have, and some of them, so that you could have islands of resilience in the case of climactic difficulties, where people could go to take shelter. And because the infrastructure is under the ground, it would be much more impervious to heat, blizzards, droughts, etc., than wires.
We are at 5:57. So there are a couple other questions in the chat that I think Audrey and I can follow up on, or maybe we could send to Dory and Sylvia and Kent to pass around, like who to contact at National Grid and some other smaller questions. We'd be happy to also take questions personally, Audrey and I, if you want to send us emails or get in touch with Heat, so we can make sure that I'll put that in the chat so that people can see our contact information. But Kent, why don't we leave time for some other wrap up from you?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa and Audrey. That was, it's just an amazing project, and thank you so much for what you're doing. I wanted to tell everybody that we'll follow up with an email to all the people that registered here with the information like what Alyssa just said. And I wanted to just briefly show you one of the things that we try and do here is come up with a monthly action list that we're updating. And if I can, I hope I've just shared the screen there. Nope, that's not the right screen, excuse me. Often a problem. So this is the one that we will also send you, everyone that's on this meeting, a link to this document, because we're going to make a few changes. One of the changes we'd like to make is to hear from Heat about things they would like to suggest as action step. And we've heard a couple of things here today. But just to briefly tell you what's here at the moment, we are encouraging people to look into their community choice electricity programs in the communities that they live in. And in Boston, there's a particularly strong program that was talked about at our last meeting. And so that's still on this checklist. The next major item is about today's topic, transitioning away from natural gas. So there is an event sponsored by Mothers Out Front this week, Thursday, on that topic. And we have a link here, and we encourage you to look at that. And there's also letting other people know about what you've been hearing here. And we'll add a few more things there. And finally, there's a lot happening this week around issues about the electricity grid in New England. And we haven't had really a speaker on this topic yet this season. But there's actually, first of all, a continued attempt to stop the gas-fired, oil-fired Peabody Peaker plant, and information about that and what you might do about it here. And then even more recently, there's some issues having to do with the entire electrical grid in New England, and about some pricing rules that have been holding back the transition to renewable energy sources. So there are some articles and a toolkit that are referenced here, and there is a rally actually tomorrow on the Boston Common in front of the State House, and there'll be many speakers, many politicians, many leaders from our community that will be talking about this issue there. So we really encourage everyone to consider attending that meeting. So that's it from us. So I want to thank the speakers again very much. That was just great stuff. And we'll be following up with you and communicating with email on things that I just said. Thank you again. And if I could ask the people on the steering committee to stay around for a bit, we'd like to follow up. So thank you all. Bye-bye until
you.
next time. Oh, we have another talk next month that Cynthia Perkins will be hosting on the topic of indoor air pollution, and particularly gas stoves as a source of that pollution. So watch out for that. Do you want to say anything else about that, Cynthia?
Our guest speaker will be Andy Krasner from Physicians for Social Responsibility, and she just knows the topic inside and out. And we're also going to do a demonstration from my kitchen of an induction cooktop stove. Stay tuned. I'll fry an egg for you.
All right, great. Thank you to everyone and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.